By the time the third orange violation notice hit my mailbox, I already knew whose fingerprints were on it, even if his name wasn't anywhere on the paper. My neighbor, Brent Holloway, liked to stand on his porch with a coffee mug and a clean white polo, watching my house like it was a crime scene instead of a home. Every Tuesday, like clockwork, another complaint would appear. Trash can visible from the street. Grass too high by half an inch. Fence stain fading. Delivery boxes left on the steps. The city called them anonymous reports. I called them what they were, a campaign. And the worst part was that each report came with a fee, an inspection, and a little more pressure to give up the place my mother died helping me buy. What Brent didn't know, what he could not have known when he smiled and told the mail carrier he was just protecting property values, was that one unpaid round of municipal penalties could trigger a lien under our county code. I was already juggling hospital debt from my mother's last year, a variable rate mortgage that had just adjusted upward, and a storm repair claim my insurer kept delaying. Brent wasn't just annoying me. He was pushing me toward a financial cliff. One certified envelope at a time, I bought the house in Cedar Ridge, outside Charlotte, because it was the first place that ever felt like mine. A narrow blue Craftsman with a deep porch and a magnolia tree that dropped leaves all over the walkway. My mother had cried in the title office when I signed. She kept saying, "Baby, no landlord can ever take this from you now." 2 years later, she was gone, and every room in that house felt like a promise I was trying not to break. Then Brent moved in next door. At first he introduced himself like a friendly suburban cliché. Firm handshake, expensive watch, new SUV. He said he worked in land acquisition, which meant nothing to me until much later. Things changed when I refused to cut down the magnolia. He said the leaves blew into his yard. I said trees do that. He said the roots could affect the sidewalk line between our properties. I pulled the survey from my closing file and showed him the trunk sat well inside my boundary. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile people use when they are not done with you. 2 days later, a code inspector showed up because someone reported yard overgrowth creating rodent risk. I laughed the first time. I didn't laugh the fifth. The complaints became a rhythm. Wednesday, inspection. Friday, warning. Monday, reinspection. Every week, something new. A hose visible beside the house. A paint peel on the rear trim. A loose picket on a section of fence not even facing the street. I spent lunch breaks on hold with code enforcement and evenings fixing things that weren't dangerous, weren't urgent, and often weren't even violations until an inspector decided to read the rules in the harshest possible way. Every time I took a day off work for an inspection, I lost money. Every time I paid a compliance fee, my savings thinned. My brother told me to get cameras. I did. They caught Brent walking the shared line at dawn, Brent photographing my gutter after a storm, Brent pointing at my house while talking to a city truck parked 2 doors down. But none of it was enough. Code enforcement wouldn't identify complainants. They said the process protected community reporting. My attorney friend, Denise, looked over the notices and said the real danger wasn't the citations themselves. It was accumulation. You miss enough deadlines, she told me over takeout at my dining table. They stack late fees. If the city abates anything on its own, they bill you. If you can't pay, they lien the property. That doesn't mean he gets your house tomorrow, but it means leverage. He knows that. Around that time, I started noticing Brent wasn't just obsessed with my yard. He was obsessed with my lot. He asked weirdly specific questions about the depth of my backyard. He once told me, while pretending to admire the detached garage, that if I ever got tired of fighting an old house, he knew investors who could close fast. I told him I wasn't selling. Then the pressure got smarter. One complaint alleged my storm repair tarp had remained too long and created visual blight. That part was true, because my insurer had delayed approving the roof claim for 11 weeks. Another report claimed unpermitted electrical work in the garage. That one terrified me, because I had hired a handyman after a breaker failed, and while he'd only replaced fixtures, I had no proof beyond a cash receipt and a text thread. The inspector flagged the garage for further review. I paid for a licensed electrician to examine everything, then paid again for a retroactive permit sign-off just to make the file disappear. Brent's reports were no longer random. They were targeting weak spots, places where delay, paperwork, and money could corner me. I began sleeping with my phone on my chest because every unknown number might be the city, the insurer, or the mortgage servicer. My payment had jumped after the rate adjustment, and twice I had to split utility bills between cards to stay current. The first crack in Brent's polished routine came from Mrs. Alvarez across the street. One evening, while I helped her carry groceries, she asked, "Why does that man keep meeting with the same silver sedan after dark?" The next Thursday, I watched from my guest room. At 7:18 p.m., a silver Lexus parked by the hydrant. A man in a navy blazer stepped out carrying a folio. Brent met him at the curb. The man pointed toward my side yard. Brent nodded. They spoke for 7 minutes and then drove separately away. The next morning, I pulled county property records during my coffee break. Brent had bought his house through an LLC called Holloway Residential Holdings. That alone wasn't strange. What was strange was that the mailing address for the LLC matched the office suite of a small developer that had recently petitioned to rezone 3 parcels on the next street over for townhomes. My stomach dropped. I spent that weekend reading Planning Commission agendas. Buried in an old packet was a concept sketch, not final, but real. It showed how several backyards along our row could create access for an internal drive if the lots changed hands. My lot was the key. Combined with Brent's property, it opened a clean path for development. Suddenly, the weekly complaints stopped looking personal. They looked strategic. I took everything to Denise. She sent a public records request to the city for complaint metadata, inspector communications, and internal notes tied to my address. During those 2 weeks, Brent escalated again. He sent a landscaping company to trim branches that hung over the line, only they cut well past the line and hacked part of my magnolia canopy. I called the police for documentation. The records request came back on a Thursday afternoon. Anonymous names were redacted, but timestamps, phone logs, and routing notes weren't. 12 of the 16 complaints about my property had been phoned in within minutes of a call from the same number to another department extension. Denise traced the number through a business listing. It belonged to Holloway Development Consulting, Brent's separate company from the LLC that owned his home. One inspector had even written, "Complainant states, property owner may be financially distressed and likely non-responsive." Financially distressed. I had never spoken to these people about my finances. Brent had. That one phrase changed the air in the room. Denise stopped being my attorney friend and became my attorney. She said if Brent had been weaponizing the reporting system with false or misleading representations to induce harsher enforcement, we could argue harassment, abuse of process, and interference. Then came the hearing notice. Because I had disputed 2 citations and paid others late, The city scheduled an administrative compliance hearing. It sounded minor. It wasn't. If the hearing officer upheld the violations and authorized abatement authority for future noncompliance, the city could perform work and bill me directly. Denise said that kind of order, sitting in a file while my finances were stretched, could become a loaded gun. Brent must have known that too, because 3 days before the hearing, he caught me at the mailbox and said, almost kindly, "These things get expensive, Claire. Sometimes the smart move is to sell before fees, and legal costs swallow the equity." I looked him dead in the eye and said, "You seem unusually invested in my equity." His smile flickered, just once. At the hearing, Denise let the city present photos, dates, and standard language about safety. Then she asked for the complaint chronology to be marked. She introduced the public records response. She asked why internal notes referred to me as financially distressed. She asked whether the city independently verified that claim. She asked why my property had been re-inspected faster than average response times, shown in their own logs. She asked whether any inspector knew the complainant had a development-related business adjacent to my lot. The room changed. The city attorney asked for a recess. After the break, Denise introduced photographs of Brent's contractor cutting my tree beyond the property line. She introduced the rezoning sketch. Then she introduced a recorded voicemail Brent had left me the previous evening. In it, he said, "I'm trying to help you before the city forces your hand. Once lions start and legal review widens, your best number disappears." But the real twist didn't come until Denise subpoenaed more records after the hearing was continued. That was when we found the purchase option. 8 months earlier, Brent's consulting company had signed a contingent option agreement with the developer whose suite shared the LLC mailing address. If Brent could acquire or control my parcel and secure access alignment through the side yard corridor, he'd receive a 6-figure fee plus a percentage of the assemblage premium. In plain English, every weekly complaint, every inspection, every fine had been part of a plan to grind me down until I sold cheap or fell behind enough to negotiate scared. Then it got worse. An email chain showed Brent forwarding my citation history to a loan broker, suggesting that mounting municipal exposure may motivate a quiet off-market disposition. One message referenced soft contact through servicing pressure, which made Denise ask for my mortgage correspondence. That night, I dug through every envelope I'd stacked in a kitchen drawer. Hidden among escrow notices was one odd piece of mail from 3 months earlier. A refinance solicitation addressed to me, but marked with handwritten forwarding instructions to a P.O. box I didn't recognize. Denise traced the box. It was rented by Holloway Development Consulting. My hands went numb. Brent hadn't just been reporting me. He had intercepted property-related financial mail and routed it to his own company mailbox. It wasn't enough to steal my loan, but it was enough to show intent. Enough to show he wanted data, leverage, and timing. Enough for Denise to contact not just city council, but the police and the state real estate commission. After that, his world started cracking. The city suspended enforcement activity on my disputed citations pending review. The hearing officer issued an interim finding that the complaint pattern raised serious concerns about targeted misuse of municipal processes. The developer, suddenly aware that discovery could drag them into a civil conspiracy claim, terminated Brent's option agreement. Still, I wasn't safe yet. My savings were wrecked. My roof claim was unresolved. My mortgage was current, but barely. Denise pushed for an emergency injunction, barring Brent from contacting city departments regarding my property, except through counsel and filed a civil action seeking damages. That filing did what truth alone sometimes can't. It made the numbers move. My insurer, which had been dragging its feet on the roof, suddenly accelerated after Denise copied them on the litigation and attached the city suspension order. The bank approved a temporary hardship modification that lowered my payment for 6 months. And because the city now viewed the enforcement history as compromised, several fees were paused and later withdrawn. He tried one last swing, of course. 2 months later, Brent filed for a protective order, claiming I had harassed him with cameras and public accusations. At the evidentiary hearing, Denise played his voicemail, introduced the option contract, the P.O. box records, and the complaint logs. Brent took the stand and said he had only ever acted out of concern for neighborhood safety. Then Denise asked whether neighborhood safety usually included routing another homeowner's lender mail to your business box while negotiating a contingency fee for her parcel. The silence after that was so complete, I could hear the air vent. The judge denied his petition from the bench. Then, in a tone people use when they want every word remembered, he said the evidence suggested a pattern of calculated intimidation for financial gain, and warned Brent that further contact would be viewed in that light. That was the moment the power shifted. Not privately in my kitchen, not emotionally in my chest, but out loud, on the record, where men like Brent cannot charm their way around paper. The settlement came 4 months later. Brent agreed to pay damages, cover my legal fees, fund replacement and treatment for the magnolia, and sign a non-contact agreement. He also had to retract prior statements made to city personnel regarding my supposed financial instability. I used part of the money to finish the roof, part to rebuild savings, and part to repaint the porch the exact shade of blue my mother had chosen. Brent sold his house the following spring. On closing day, the moving truck sat where the silver Lexus used to park. I watched from my porch swing with a glass of iced tea and let myself feel it. Not revenge exactly, but relief with a spine. Mrs. Alvarez walked over with banana bread and said, "Looks like property values survived." I laughed so hard I cried. Now when people ask why I kept every notice, every envelope, every photo, every voicemail, I tell them the truth. Harassment likes to wear small clothes. It dresses up as concern, as rules, as process, as paperwork. By the time you realize it has a bank account and a plan, it may already be counting on your exhaustion. Brent thought weekly reports would make me surrender slowly enough that nobody would call it theft. He thought pressure was cleaner than burglary, more respectable, more deniable. He was wrong. The house is still mine. The magnolia still drops leaves all over the walkway. Some mornings I leave the trash can out an extra hour just because I can. And every Tuesday, when the mail truck stops at the curb, I feel a little echo in my chest before I remember. The envelopes are ordinary again. Bills, coupons, a birthday card from my brother. Nothing orange, nothing threatening. Just paper. Just a home. Just a woman who learned that sometimes the thing saving your life is not some dramatic speech, but opening one more letter, saving one more file, and refusing to be priced out of your own peace